I'm going to read some more from the biography, Who Was Roald Dahl. We are on chapter 5. So, after the danger of war, Roald rested quietly at home in the country. Even though he didn't have much money, he started collecting art and antiques. Antiques are like old things, old pieces of art. So in 1941, the U.S. entered the war to help the Allies, Great Britain, France, and in time Russia. Roald took a job in Washington, D.C. at the British Embassy. In his Royal Air Force uniform, he was every inch a charming and handsome war hero. He went to many fancy Washington parties. He met interesting and glamorous people. Roald became friends with author Ian Fleming, who wrote the James Bond books. He sparred in the boxing ring with Ernest Hemingway. He played poker with Harry Truman, who became president in 1945. America and Britain were friends. Even so, Roald kept his ears open for information and secrets he could pass on to the British government. Some people say he was a spy. Although popular, Roald was known for starting nasty arguments. At parties, he seemed to like making people angry. Why did he act this way? Part of the reason may have been pain from his war injuries. In 1945 alone, he had several back surgeries. He had to stay in bed for months, and he kept having terrible headaches. It was during this time that Roald Dahl began writing for magazines. It happened in a surprising way. A magazine reporter was sent to do an article on Roald's fighter pilot days. Instead, Roald wrote up an account himself and sent it to the reporter. So this is a sketch of Harry S. Truman, who was one of our presidents. And this is him sick in bed starting to write. Roald's art collection. Roald Dahl loved paintings by French Impressionists. They were a group of painters who started painting in the late 1800s. Their paintings captured a glimpse or impression of a scene. When Roald sold a story, he would immediately buy a painting. Then he might have to sell the painting to get by until he sold another story. He said that paintings by Matisse, Roald, Cézanne, Renoir, Degas, and Sisley decorated my walls for brief periods in the 40s. He collected and loved art all his life. Did you know you were a writer? The reporter asked Roald. Soon Roald's piece appeared in the magazine. It was the first time that Roald Dahl was paid for his writing. He wrote 16 more stories for the magazine. Later, the stories came out as a book, Over to You. Walt Disney heard about this war hero who wrote stories. He invited Roald to Hollywood. They talked about making a movie. It didn't work out, but his script about gremlins and airplanes was turned into a book, his very first children's book. That's him meeting Disney. So that's Roald Dahl, and that's Disney. Walt Disney. So it was turned into the book called The Gremlins, a Royal Air Force story by Flight Lieutenant Roald Dahl. President Roosevelt's wife, Eleanor, read it to her grandchildren. She liked the book so much she invited Roald to the White House. By the end of the summer in 1945, the war was finally over. Roald had had enough adventure. Even though he had been living in a world of wealth and glamour, he just wanted to go home and be a writer. England had suffered during the war. Roald was shocked to see the bombed-out buildings, roads, and bridges. There were food and fuel shortages, crime, and unemployment. Even so, Roald was very glad to be back with his family. I'm guessing these are the people in line to get some food, but there was food shortages. So chapter 6, A Struggling Writer. Back home, living with his mother, Roald began work on his first novel. It was for adults. It was very hard for him to write. Roald was in pain the whole time. When it was finished, he couldn't walk and had to have more back surgery. The problems with his back never went away. In fact, by the time he was 65, he had 2 steel hips and had undergone 6 back surgeries. His novel was called Sometime Never. It was about a world destroyed by nuclear war. So depressing. It was published in 1948. Ernest Hemingway, this is writing advice. Ernest Hemingway gave Roald some advice about writing. He said, when it starts going well, quit. Roald believed that Hemingway was right. It's easier to begin writing again the next day if you start at an easy point, rather than at a place where you feel stuck. So this is a sketch of Ernest Hemingway, who is also a very famous author. Writing never came easily to Roald. Working on a long novel had been particularly hard. He decided to try writing short stories. This wasn't easy either. It took him months to write a story, sometimes a whole month just to finish the first page. His stories were darkly funny and had surprising endings. Unfortunately, most editors thought the stories were too creepy. Roald was over 30 and running out of money. He had some money from his father, but he was losing a lot of it gambling. That's when you make bets. So like this is a sketch of the dogs, so he was betting on the dogs. He liked to bet on greyhound races. He owned quite a few dogs, hired a trainer, and bet on his dogs at the track. More often than not, he lost. Then slowly his luck began to change, though not with the greyhounds. The New Yorker magazine, famous for publishing short stories, bought one from Roald and paid well. More of his stories appeared in other magazines. Some of them won awards for mystery writing. Even though his first novel hadn't sold well, Roald still wanted to write another. He began work on 50,000 Frog Skins. Frog Skins is a nickname for dollar bills. He finished it in 1950. Unfortunately, even Roald's own agent didn't think it was any good. The agent thought no publisher would buy it. After putting in so much work and time, Roald was crushed. He was losing more money racing dogs. He was 34 years old and still living with his mother. It was a real low point in his life. Even so, Roald didn't want to give up writing. British publishers didn't like his work. Maybe Americans would. And here's a snapshot of Roald Dahl's short stories. Both Kiss Kiss and To Someone Like You are collections of Roald's stories for grown-ups. Perhaps his most famous story is Lambs to Slaughter. In it, a woman kills her husband by hitting him with a frozen leg of lamb. Then she serves the lamb to the policemen who are looking for the murder weapon. In another short story, The Sound Machine, a man invents a machine to hear noises that plants make. What he hears is plants screaming in pain. In the early 1960s, several of Roald's stories appeared as episodes on the popular TV show Alfred Hitchcock Presents. And here's a sketch of Alfred Hitchcock. And we'll finish there and read about the next 2 chapters tomorrow. Thanks for listening, guys.